We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week interview. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher, as well as by this week by California Democrat Jim Costa. And Congressman Costa, we appreciate you taking a little bit of time to join us in what has been a very busy week in your state. As anyone that has a social media account has seen pictures of just devastation in your state and in neighboring states from wildfires that have hit the region here on these last couple of days, last couple of weeks. Wondering, I know we're early on in the process. I know these fires are continuing to burn, but based on the assessment that you have right now, what do we know in terms of potential damage, potential impact, as well as maybe potential assistance that might be needed from Capitol Hill?
Well, we wrote a letter last week to the president requesting disaster designation status for many of the counties that have been hard hit in California and also in neighboring states, Oregon and Washington. I was pleased yesterday that the president acted on 3 counties that are here in my area: Fresno County and Madera County and Tulare County, that allows for FEMA assistance directly. Congressman Mike Thompson has introduced legislation. I'm a co-sponsor, and we have bipartisan groups supporting that, as was the signers on the letter, was also bipartisan, that will provide additional support. We believe that the losses in Western states are going to amount into the billions of dollars. I mean, now in California, and we're halfway through our fire season, we've had 3.1 million acres that have been burned. I mean, think about that. Last year, we had less than 500,000 acres that had been burned. So 3.1, and we're in the middle of the fire season. We're not done yet. And and people need to understand it's just not our forests, our public lands. But I was talking to Congressman Mike Thompson on Sunday, and in 2 weeks he's had almost 400,000 acres burned in Napa, Sonoma, and Mendocino counties. The fire that we're dealing with here is a very hot fire. It went from 32,000 acres on Sunday to over 175,000 acres today. And so it speaks to the need to deal with a whole host of forest management practices that we have made changes in the last year with the U.S. Forest Service. That's part of the USDA, as you all know. What has been a problem in part is for the last decade or two, we've spent the money that we set aside for forest management, and the fires have become more intense, and with climate change and other factors, the drought, greater fuel to burn, and so instead of trying to manage the forests, we're using that money plus the other money we appropriate to put out fires, and we've had to augment those budgets to put out fires. And we've just generally and I would submit to you 20 years under multiple administrations have not done a very good job in managing our forests, and that has to change. I mean, when I talk about the drought, a lot of people don't realize the beetle bark is a natural infestation on our forests throughout the country. And the trees, ponderosas and other pines, their natural ability to resist this infestation is through the sap that it emits through the tree. And in drought conditions, they can't produce the sap, and so the beetle is able to get in there and persevere, and it kills the tree. And it's estimated that we've got anywhere from around 100 million dead trees in the forest between Lassen County and Lake Isabella down in Kern County. And while we've tried to remove those trees, there's not there's so many, the market hasn't been able to absorb them. We've had to, what they call log decking, where you take the tree down and you stack these logs. But there's just a lot of fuel there with these dry conditions. And so that's part of the challenge. But there's a lot of private lands. I mean, we've got hundreds and thousands of people, not only in California, but in Oregon and Washington, people who used to live in urban areas wanting to move out and live in the forest, live in the country, and it's a lot harder to manage these lands, especially private lands, when you've got now tens and thousands and hundreds and thousands of people living where they didn't live 30 years ago. And Mike Thompson and I were talking, there are thousands of acres in the wine growing regions that now have smoke damage, and that, these wonderful wine growing regions that produce Cabernet and Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, there's not a market for smoky wines, at least not one that I'm aware of. And so, those all add to the losses. So we have a lot of commercial losses. And then just the destruction of, whether they be homes or whether they be businesses. So that all goes into the losses that we're experiencing.
Congressman, big question, as you know, on Capitol Hill is whether there'll be another coronavirus relief package. Talks seem to be at an impasse. Democrats in the Senate blocked passage of this skinny bill, as it's called, that Republicans put up. Of course, the House passed your HEROES Act, $3 trillion HEROES Act back in May. Nothing since then. Republicans saying that talks appear to be at a dead end. What's your read on the situation? I believe you're on a call with Democratic leadership. Where do things stand?
Well, we're clearly at an impasse, as you noted, Philip. And, there are many who feel that we're not going to reach an agreement by October 2nd. I still hold out hope, and I do so because the need is so great. Usually we get things done in Congress when you have that intersection between good public policy and the politics. And I think that intersection is there. I mean, I can't for the life of me understand why the president would not want to. He likes to say he's a deal maker, and he certainly sure as hell hasn't cared about the deficit in the past. So while our measure was 3.4 trillion and theirs was $1 trillion, we acknowledge that we would negotiate halfway down to 2.2 trillion. And what has been the biggest roadblock thus far is an agreement on the amount of money. Federal Reserve Chairman Powell said that, when 6 weeks ago, that the Federal Reserve had done everything they could to pump liquidity into the markets. I mean, stock market's doing okay. And interest rates are almost zero. But that Congress would have to appropriate more money. I think Manchin has indicated that as well. I think there's been some whisper talk that they might get to 1.5. I think the administration needs to get somewhere over 2 trillion. If we get to that point in the next 2 weeks, then it's a matter of putting in the categories and prioritizing. There certainly doesn't seem much willingness on the part of the administration to support states and local governments. And they've been hard hit as a result of the coronavirus. I mean, their loss of revenues. Doesn't matter if you're a blue state or a red state. I mean, I saw the governor of Kentucky, who's a Democratic governor, talk about the highest deficit that Kentucky's run in recent history at about, I guess, something over $1.5 billion. And I think the interviewer said, well, gee, you have a senator who has some ability to get things done, a senior senator. And the governor says, well, I have a good relationship with him, and I'm telling him how much we need this, but it doesn't seem to have impacted, and part of I think that Senator McConnell problem that he has is that there are 20 Republican senators that have made it clear they're not going to vote for anything. So notwithstanding all of that conventional wisdom, I still think because of the convergence of the importance of the need, the unemployment checks, the payroll protection program, for additional testing. We all want to reopen this economy, but we can't do so unless we get a level of testing that allows us to determine where this coronavirus is, so that if we have an outbreak, as I had in a food processing facility, you can do the level of testing, and the turnaround time is real critical too. It's got to be done within 24, 48 hours, because if it takes a week, heck, it's not doing you any good to corner the virus in that particular facility. And to open our schools, we all want to open our schools, but we've seen a whole host of schools around the country, universities that have had to shut down after being open a month or so. And so you can't open schools safely without sufficient support. And, so that's, I think, where the deadlock is, the impasse. And I had a friend of mine from the South, and they always have a better way of explaining things than I can. But he talked about students and universities and trying to keep them at social distancing. He says, I got some nephews that are in university. He says, trying to get university students to social distance is trying to get a dog to act like a cat. It just doesn't happen. So I don't know. I still am hopeful that we're going to get something done.
Agricultural Secretary Perdue has been promising a second round of coronavirus food assistance program payments, separate from what Congress is doing. They already have the money. That might come this week. You've had some discussions with USDA, some concerns you raised with them. Secretary Perdue indicated that they were probably going to cover the same commodities they covered in round one. What are you hearing?
Well, that's a concern. I was very involved in the initial funding for it, and I told Secretary Perdue that we needed not to have a lifeline, but a safety net, that this coronavirus was going to be with us for the foreseeable future, I think until next year. And American agriculture on a region by region basis has been dramatically impacted. And it obviously varies from commodities to commodities. And therefore, we've been trying to push the USDA to focus on those commodities that have been the most severely impacted, regardless of what regions they come from. I think we've got to support all of American agriculture. But if I might be parochial for a moment, I'm a third generation family farmer in California. That's my primary source of income. Those almond trees you see behind me, I just planted back in April. And the reality is that California is the #1 agriculture state in the nation. And 44% of our agriculture is exported around the world. And a lot of our markets have been really impacted as a result of not only the trade issues, but COVID-19. The Chinese have done some purchases of sorghum, wheat, corn, and pork after the February signing of the legislation. But I don't think nearly to the extent, and I think at this point, since the president is determined to put all the blame, because he doesn't want to accept any responsibility, that this is a China virus, I believe the Chinese are now slow walking whatever agreements that they've made. And they certainly haven't been purchasing the commodities that we grow in California, whether we're talking about our tree nut industries, almonds, pistachios, and walnuts, whether we're talking about dairy products, the beef, they've been buying from Australia, the almonds they've been buying from Australia. And so we have almost 300, well, over 300 commodities that we grow in California, and a lot of these prices have been depressed. And, you know, I've never been a fan, Philip, and we've talked about it, these tariff wars. And as I told you before, I don't support it because I think everybody has leverage on tariff wars. Mm-hmm. And I think if you estimate the pluses and the minuses over the last 2 years, I don't think we've gained more. In fact, I think in many instances we've lost market share, and therefore it's impacted our prices. And the trade mitigation funding that we've appropriated in Congress in the last 2 years, which I supported, is a pittance. I mean, you know, if you're given 3 cents or 6 cents a pound on cherries, or you know, 12 cents per hundredweight on milk products, I mean, that doesn't make up for the losses because of what's occurred as a result of the tariff war. So I'm hopeful that the USDA will do 2 things. They'll look at those commodities grown in this country that have been most severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic at the price levels, and that they look at extending the timeline on losses beyond April 15th. I think they're going to do that. But whether it's on CFAP, or whether it's Section 32 purchasing, or whether it's the food box, which I think is working out better. I know the Secretary has a lot of, believes the food box is an important part of our overall effort. I think they're starting to see improvements there with our food banks and with a number of our religious organizations that are providing food for working poor and for people who are disabled and children. But, you know, the ability to try to kind of keep a facsimile of the school lunch program going with schools closed has really been critical. I mean, we have a lot of folks in this country that, you know, are hungry.
Congressman, I want to wrap up asking you a question on something that's been discussed a couple of times on this program by some of your colleagues, and that being the potential for, as we look across the board at kind of a wide variety of different things that are impacting the ag sector, be it just the farm economy in general, the COVID-19 pandemic, et cetera, there's been some calls to potentially reconsider the Farm Bill on an earlier timeline than the 2023 reauthorization that is currently scheduled. Wondering kind of your thoughts on that as one of the senior Democrats on the committee. What would be your thoughts on potentially reworking the Farm Bill beginning next year instead of waiting to pass a new bill until 2023?
Well, as the chairman of the subcommittee on livestock and foreign agriculture, this is a conversation I think that we as subcommittee chairs have with the chairman and with some of our Republican colleagues, especially those that have been through previous farm reauthorizations. You know, our responsibility, I believe, as members of Congress under this unprecedented historical time due to this pandemic, is to first and foremost protect the health and safety of America, and concurrently deal with the devastating economic and social impacts that have taken place. And I like to use the example that 7 months ago, no one could anticipate with the closure of schools and restaurants how our complicated and complex food supply chain, and I believe, and I think it's absolutely fact, that production of food and fiber in America is a national security issue. It is a national security issue. We tend to not look at it that way. We tend to take it for granted. Too many people seem to think that their food comes from a grocery store. They may get it there, but it doesn't come from that grocery store. And the fact is that that whole complicated and complex food supply chain that involves about 4% of our nation's population has been turned upside down with impacts that no one could have anticipated. And we're still reeling from those effects. I just think that as we get to a new Congress early next year, we should be open to the possibility, depending upon the impacts of agricultural production across the country and the financial and economic circumstances facing our farmers, ranchers, dairymen and women, and all of the other elements that are part of that food supply chain that puts dinner on America's table every night, that we maybe start hearings early and maybe look at making the kinds of changes and adjustments that this pandemic might require us to do just so. And so, I mean, I don't think that we can continue to go as we've dealt with an emergency crisis here in the last 6 months, but that may not be sufficient to deal with the next 2 years. And so we need to be open to, I think, all of the above, because, you know, American agriculture is the best in the world. Nobody does it better than those people who work in our fields and our farmers and ranchers and dairymen. It's a partnership, and they've been hard hit. And so therefore we have to do everything we possibly can, whether it's in California or whether it's in the Midwest or in the Northeast or in the South. But we need to be able to ensure that we can demonstrate to our farm belt that they need to know that we have their back.
So from wildfires to CFAP to COVID-19, a lot of different things on the agenda for California agriculture and American agriculture as a whole. And Congressman Costa, we appreciate you stopping by to chat.
Thank you very much, and keep up the good work, gentlemen. And I'm always anxious to get a chance to participate in Agri-Pulse. You do a good job in informing our farmers throughout the country on the challenges we're facing, and those in Washington especially. To say the least, we have a few of them.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. For Congressman Jim Costa and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.
Thank you. Be safe.